We're in Kössen and there's supposed to be about a 3-meter north wind this afternoon, which doesn't seem like much, but in these mountains it seems like quite a lot. Plus you have to add to that the valley wind that actually flows south from the north side of the Alps typically through those valleys, and I think it's going to be strong enough from the north in the afternoon that it's going to be hard to push against it. In Kössen the takeoff is to the north side and the sun in the morning is of course somewhere in the southeast. So the thermals. Usually the thermals are there already something even like before 11 o'clock, let's say. And it's always good to get up a little bit before the hill, but there are no bombs going up there. And they're usually on the south side, so I'm heading up the south side pretty early on, which is where I'm struggling a little bit, but eventually I'll get up. And I'm hopping over to the southeast, which is the classic route, and we're going to fly that today. In Kössen, so often one flies southeast towards Zell am See, then along the valley that runs along Zell am See as far as one dares and then back north to Kössen. And I don't want to actually fly that last leg into the strongest wind. So I'm coming up with this quite unconventional route, where we actually turn back south very soon. Then we'll fly a little bit west, north at the best part of the day, hopefully. And then actually after that first ridge back east. So that's the plan for about 150 kilometers. Which I'm thinking, if we fly efficiently, it might work. I'm flying with Vít'a and Seba today. So Seba has a slightly different plan and he's not coming with us, but Vít'a and I are flying very close to each other for practically the whole route. He waits for me a bit at the beginning because I had a problem to get up a bit at the beginning, so he had to wait for me a bit. And then we were still thinking if we would reconsider the plan during the flight, if it wasn't a mistake to actually go there along the original route we had planned. Which means here at this point somewhere to the right. But we see one wing flying there, so we're going to go for it. And here we actually had the choice of flying to the smaller hills on the right or to the bigger mountain on the left. I thought the bigger mountain on the left was better, and there was a cloud near it, but again we needed to get to the lit side, that is, the other side than us. So what I do is I always look for a point and try to aim at it, and often it looks like I don't make it to that point, because of course the wing is dropping on the crossing. But then I've tested pretty reliably that once you get close to that terrain, it rarely drops any more brutally there. So actually, then close to that terrain, you can almost copy that terrain, and that place that looks like you can't get to it for most of the crossing, you end up scratching up to it. I mean, if you aim lower, you end up lower most of the time, yeah. So that's why I always try to aim as high as I can, and I rely on the end of that overpass so that it has a better glide ratio so I don't fall through there as much. So that's where it works well. That's what Vít'a and I were able to do to top out the base there. And then we keep going, which is when we get to those smaller hills, but as far as, yeah, again on that south side. Where it's gonna get cloudy now too, so that's where we think it might work. And so unfortunately we don't get up that much there, only to about 2,200, although we were getting up to something like 2,500 before that, so that's a little bit worse, and it's just a really long crossing to a bland hill overall. I can see some cloud there too, but it's not very prominent and I can tell we're going to fly low. I'm pushing back to the lighted side, which means left down the hill here. So we get up a little bit at the beginning, about 100 meters, but here the north wind is starting to show and we are in the lee. So there's just a little bit of a lee side thermal, but it tends to be very choppy, very turbulent, so we're getting out of the thermal we're in. And then Vít'a pulls me out of there, which I thank him for, onto the windward side. So where we're struggling a lot, yeah, it has the advantage that the north wind here is probably backed up again by the valley, so it keeps us quite close to the slope, but mostly it's just rising to ground level here on this wind, yeah. And no higher than that, yeah. So if the terrain is low, it's rarely any higher than that just from the unlit side actually, there'd be a thermal and that wind keeps ripping some little bubbles up there, but they don't join into any major thermal. So what I do in that situation is I always try to get to where the terrain is higher, yeah, so gain altitude on that terrain and jump somewhere further, where it's still windward and where the terrain is higher. And that's what we've been able to do for quite a long time with Vít'a. There we're just grinding up this slope where it's almost not dropping, but we're just going up like half meter at a time, yeah. So it's really slow. However, once we get towards the top, then there's a thermal. Again, I think the way it works here is that if the south side is lit up, the north side is windward, the thermals are coming from the south side, but they're stretching air from the north side as well. And I feel like it works on the north side then like there's a tablecloth around the mountain and somebody takes it and pulls it up. So there, if one is on the lighted side, those thermals often pull away from that hill, but if one is on the windward, unlighted side, then I feel like it's just lifting right up close to the terrain and you have to hold on to that terrain. Rarely does that thermal just break off lower there, because it's actually coming from the other side, so just that thermal, as it's coming up the other side, it's pulling air from the north side as well. And then we follow the planned route more or less. That means, actually, we're past the first turn point very soon and we're flying southwest. Where it's very slow, yeah. You can just fly so fast in those mountains along some ridges where you don't have to do too much thermaling, and you can just fly around those ridges at an average speed of 35 easily. But the way we have it here is that we just have to thermal it up as far as we can, do some big crossing, get up from low altitude, and go around and around like that. Yeah, so it's very slow. The average speed is really bad too with actually having to lift off at that spot where we came in really low and it's slow going. I'd like to point out one other thing that's not really related to flying, but you can see really well from the air, and that's the pollen from the conifer trees. And here on this time lapse you can see how the trees are releasing large quantities of pollen, which then fly across the landscape. And then it gets on our cars, so we have to take them to the car wash. And you can see here in this footage what a huge amount of pollen is rising, that at times it almost looks like the forest is on fire. But it's just the pollen. The day's getting better, the thermal climbs are starting to get nice. It's even well marked, there are good clouds, so you know where to fly. When we skip Kitzbühel, we fly to a more prominent peak that has a pretty good cloud over it and it's pretty clear that there's going to be a thermal. Vít'a briefly passes me and I see him fly into a really strong thermal. It kicks him up. Oh, man. Soon he's out of it again, his wing starts to twist, and then all I can see is him ducking his legs and, with the instinct of self-preservation, departing from it. I don't think I've got that much survival instinct, so I'm gonna thermal the climb. We part ways for a bit, but thankfully not for long, because I did fight the thermal here, but it was probably only at 2 meters per second. Vít'a flew a bit further and found a 4 meters per second there and very quickly made up the detour he made thanks to that strong thermal. So we continue together again and we help each other very well. Yeah, it's really cool to fly with someone together like that, because you might be doing some thermaling and your buddy, just a little bit next to you, just gets up faster. And this way the pilots can help each other out, and without the risk of getting out of it, you can just do it much more efficiently. I have had the experience that sometimes we are thermaling maybe 150 meters apart, and then it is often that the strongest is between us. I've noticed that in the past, that I just see. I'm lifting somewhere and somebody else is lifting a little bit further away. And a lot of times it's not me or him, but it's somewhere in between the two of us. So when we get close, often the best conditions are between us. So more people can definitely help each other. We're approaching an area that's actually under snow and there's some ice lakes, and I feel like the day started to go well. We're finding the climbs pretty quickly and reliably, so I'm pushing full speed. I usually push about 2/3 of the speed. Where I've tested that Zeno still doesn't get that much sinky and adds a lot of speed, yeah, and then at full speed, it seems to add a little bit of speed, but at the cost of a higher sink rate. So I usually only fly the full speed when I'm in a big sink, but here I'm actually pushing it on a normal crossing. And I end up regretting it, because although I save a few minutes by doing the crossing faster, I fly that much lower and then I have to climb slower from a lower altitude. So it wasn't really worth it, I mean the full speed system. So I'm just going to keep flying at that 2/3 again. And I'm guessing Vít'a too. He's a little bit faster because he's got a bigger wing, and so with the same glide ratio he's just going faster, but we're still progressing together. We're getting to the critical point of the whole route, which we don't know in advance, but we think we have a pretty good time. We're at the second turn point. It should be about half the route there. It's 3 o'clock, so we've been flying for about 4 hours, and we might be able to fly for another 4 hours, but we have no idea what's coming. Because we're getting to a place where several phenomena are coming together. First it's a north base wind, second it's a south-facing slope, and third it's a valley wind blowing in from the west. Vít'a is flying just ahead of me here, and so he's a lot higher up as well, because I was also going to the bathroom, so I was sinking that much more because I couldn't push the speed and I had more drag, so I was sinking more. And he's making the same decision that I would have made, and that's to fly to the south-lit side. But once we get there and I'm also in the lower altitude, it's clear to me that we're just on the wrong side of the hill. That I'm just flying a little bit next to the lighted slope and just going 2.5 or 3 meters per second down. And it's clear to me that we picked the wrong side of the hill. In retrospect, it's clear to me now that we had to cut the triangle a little bit shorter and turn it back here before the critical spot. That is, by the time we got into the valley here, which was actually on the lee side, we should have actually turned right and taken it through the mountains to the north. So that was basically almost the end of our attempt here. Because Vít'a just saw that we were on the wrong side of the hill. He didn't like the air there at all, and again, probably with a greater instinct for self-preservation than I have, he decided to voluntarily land. So I fought it, but I was going crazy slow, yeah. I just knew I wasn't going to get out of this valley. It was like, for a while I was just thermaling some turbulent 1 meter per second, 10 minutes, and then 2 minutes later I just fell back to where I was in a 3 meters per second sink, just maybe a kilometer ahead. So I was moving incredibly slowly through this valley here. It was clear to me that I just had to actually get right to turn back to the north, there was nowhere else to go. I was considering actually jumping over to the other side of that valley, which again was windward and where I suspected I would probably get up. But I think I would have gotten up somewhere above the main ridge and then I would have had to jump, I don't know, some 7 kilometers back down the valley again. And I think I'd get to the same altitude I'm at now. So I've made it through here. So it was disgusting and it was clear to me that the time was progressing a lot and that we had no chance to make the triangle we had originally planned. So I set my goal back to Kössen and somehow tried to make up for it. It was about 55 kilometers from there and then, because I wasn't flying directly to Kössen, there were high mountains. So I had to do a lot of flying around, but then in about an hour and a half, I had 45 kilometers to the finish. So, Vít'a was on the road, so even if he was walking, he was basically progressing at exactly the same speed, yeah. So this is where it became clear to me that the original plan just didn't stand a chance. And once I got at least from the lee side, the air wasn't so unpleasant. But the wind was actually even stronger there, yeah, because I was actually flying directly north, where it was blowing from. And right up against the valley, which was just rolling onto the main ridge, which is to the south. So I was going very slowly here. When I was thermaling, the track log looked like I like to do during a downwind flight. Every turn back, it's like 100, 200 meters back. But, of course, that's a very slow way to go. When I made my way to some kind of rib that was windward here, I got up there quite a bit. Even so, I had to calculate with the airspace, which at Innsbruck is at first 2,900 meters, then even only 2,600 meters, so I had to think a bit about that. In the end, when I got below that airspace, I didn't have nearly as much height, so it wasn't too bad. The airspace didn't limit me, but it was just another thing to calculate if we were flying the original route. Then it was clear to me that the end was imminent, because there was a strong wind blowing madly through the valley. It actually combined the base wind with the valley wind. The air just didn't have any obstructions in that valley at all, so it was rushing through that valley like a river and it was awfully hard to find any thermal climbs in it. Yeah, sometimes the variometer, I stayed close to the slope and the variometer would beep at times, but I even tried to turn it a couple of times, but just as soon as I turned it I just dropped 10 meters and it was no use, yeah. So in a situation like that, I'm flying along that slope mostly at 2/3 speed. Where it beeps a bit, I might let it go for a bit, but I know there's basically no point in even starting to thermal it anyway. Unless one just gets to some windward hillside again, yeah, where just that valley wind would just lean into it. But if you're just flying along what the wind is actually blowing, I don't think there's any chance of getting that low in it anymore. So that's where I knew it was over. And I just kind of kept going down the track out of habit. I was trying to get to some village, which I didn't get to. But when I finished, I found out that it was a 5-minute drive to the station and that the train was going in 4 minutes. So I started hitchhiking, and surprisingly I made it because very quickly some hippies stopped me and dropped me off at the station. The train was a few minutes late, so once we got to the station I just quickly hopped on the train and caught it. Then we met up with Vít'a again at the last part of the trip, so we rode the bus together and we told each other all our impressions, found out what we did wrong and what we would do differently next time. Actually, the classic route was possible to fly that day. One guy on an Enzo with a submarine, he flew almost 200 kilometers FAI on the classic route, he just stretched it a lot. But some other wing that flew there, then back on that third leg, some xenon it was, so it didn't make it against the wind. So it was probably better to fly the original route today. So that plan didn't work out for me here. I'm just not that familiar with the Alps, and a more experienced pilot would probably have known on paper that it was doomed to fail. But I don't think we missed it by that much. In my opinion, if we hadn't crashed into that valley towards Ziller, where actually Vít'a ended up and I started to end up there, and we had turned back 5 kilometers earlier, we could have flown further and maybe even come back. So definitely a great experience. It wasn't very pleasant against the wind, but where I actually flew against the strongest wind, at least it was in an open valley, so there weren't any big rocks to throw me against. So still good from that point of view.